Well, hello there. Welcome to Art in Focus. We're going to get started here promptly at 7 as we usually do. I wanted to thank Community Healthcare Systems, who's our sponsor for this program, sponsoring another season of Art in Focus. We appreciate that. And I also wanted to thank Joe Rowan for the music that we use and have been using for our title slide for these presentations. Joe was, of course, one of our guests earlier this season, and he's one of our performers who drops by and helps us out sometimes at events. So thank you, Joe, for that. I want to just touch on the YouTube feed. We're of course live streaming to YouTube, where some people are joining us. I want to let you know that last week, for some inexplicable reason, we did have a small glitch, and that it stopped the feed mid-feed. So if that happens to you, go on over to our website and grab that Zoom link and join us on Zoom. So I apologize that happened, but if it does happen again today, know that you can always hop on the Zoom feed as well. I don't have much to share tonight before we get started. I do have two quick announcements before I bring our guest in. I want to remind everybody that Work, Fight, Give is still up in our gallery and will be through April 12th. Of course, we're here tonight to talk with an artist who's also exhibiting as part of that exhibition. And then I wanted to remind everybody that spring classes begin at the end of the month and registration is still open. So, if you're interested in taking a class at South Shore Arts, we are back open for business, and we have implemented a number of safety protocols, and so far everything's been going pretty darn well. So I'm going to hop right into our program, and I'm going to introduce our guest tonight, who's Piotr. He's going to have to remind me when he comes back on, but Szyhalski, and a portion of Piotr's recent poster project, COVID-19 Labor Camp Report, is on display in the center of our gallery, as you'll see momentarily if you haven't already visited the gallery. And this exhibit, or Piotr's posters, are being exhibited kind of all over the country right now in various venues. But by his own admission, this exhibition with South Shore Arts is somewhat unique, or is unique, in that it is appearing alongside of original posters from World War II. And that's important to Piotr for a number of reasons that he'll talk about during his presentation. Piotr is a teacher. He teaches at MCAD, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design in Minneapolis. He works across disciplines. You're going to get to see a little bit of Piotr's work that isn't on display in our gallery right now as part of this presentation. And he has a history of exhibiting all over the world and the country and the world, for that matter. He's shown with the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago. He's shown at the International Center of Photography, a number of other museums and galleries as well, that if he feels like it's important, I'll let him talk about, but I won't sit here and read through everything that I pulled off of his MCAD bio. So Piotr, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute yourself and to bring your video on. There he is, and I'm going to spotlight you so that we're both visible to our audience. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Micah. Thanks for having me. And I do want to give you and Bridget special thanks for all the work that you guys have done on installing the posters. I know that the installation itself was somewhat unusual with the wheat pasting and the structure that needed to be put together in order to facilitate that mode of display. But I very much appreciate it. And Micah, thank you for reaching out in the first place to suggest even this idea of showing the COVID project alongside of the World War II posters. Like you said, I love the concept from the very beginning, and I'm very happy that we managed to make it happen. There's a number of reasons for this, or a number of ways for me to talk about the parallels between the two bodies of work. And so I'm going to, if that's okay, I'm going to share my screen and kind of show just a few things, kind of a quick overview of the project, specifically with the context of this parallel exhibition with the World War II posters in mind. So if you haven't seen the exhibition, which contains, I'd say roughly a little more than a half of the series. The whole series consists of 225 drawings that were just coming on the anniversary of the first piece, which happened on March 24th, and then continue for about 8 months until November 3rd. So the whole series is still sort of available for viewing on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram became kind of sort of original platform, if you will. The photos that we took of the drawings with my daughter on the porch were posted there. and became part of that shared communal experience. But for the purpose of, so I would invite you to see the project there. For the purpose of this conversation, I just selected a few examples to talk a little bit about some overarching themes. Just walk you very, very quickly through a few ideas of, for example, several visual themes that were used through the series. The homes, the whole idea of quarantine and lockdown became a very quickly kind of a visual metaphor or part of that visual language that I used throughout the whole series. Hands that, you know, were part of our obsession with touch and cleanliness and constant washing of the hands, but also the fact that hands are such a prominent visual device in so much of the history of poster design. Then there's the hands that are marked with these dollar cufflinks that I refer to as the hands of the regime. Phones, just acknowledging the amount of our experience of the pandemic taking place on the phone and the various contexts in which that device kind of negotiated our relationship with reality. The coffins as a kind of device for acknowledging our mortality and the death that became such a devastating dimension of the whole pandemic context or experience. Or fire, that initially was sort of used as a metaphorical language for the pandemic, but then became a literal sort of response to the fires of the uprising that erupted here in Minneapolis and then swept the country and the world. Then within the series, because it's so big, 225 drawings, I kind of eventually developed these genres, if you will, visual genres, like this that I refer to as the kind of snake oil advertising genre, heavily laced with language that was directly inspired by language of the Cultural Revolution, describing the great accomplishments of the great leader. Or these fake illustrations or artificial or imaginary illustrations for imaginary publications, or this genre that I refer to as the old white man orgy, with a lot of booze and money floating around, basically men doing kind of gross things. And then the adjacent subject matter of the financial inequities and money and the underlining greed that was such a massive presence in the mishandling of the pandemic. Nature, but also as a not just as a kind of an antidote, but also as a kind of a signal of the yet larger crisis related to climate change. And then, of course, police brutality that became such a massive presence in the sort of in the middle of the series with the uprising and the following the murder of George Floyd. And then finally, there's a number of these very, very specific propaganda devices or quotations that are happening, the fist smashing things, the victory signs, the foot stomping on these, and a number of kind of visual connections that are present throughout the whole series. And so those are some of the very concrete things that when that idea of showing the work alongside the World War II posters came along, I was super excited about. So I'm going to show you a couple of a few examples of situations where the drawings actually very intentionally make these connections to very specific posters design. There's a couple of that, as you can see, very directly acknowledge the compositional properties and some of the, in this case, body language from actually World War II designs. So this is a very beautiful classic British poster, World War II poster, or this amazing historical design that I decided to sort of visually reenact, substituting the mother, the nurse, for the sort of fully PPE'd nurse in the COVID context. And this was a drawing made on Mother's Day, which to me felt like a very interesting loop of ideas that was happening there. And then in some instances, maybe it's not a visual reference, but the phrasing that comes from specific artifacts that emerged during World War II, specifically on the home front, like this idea of sort of supporting the Air Force with the slogan "Keep 'em flying," that became "Keep 'em dying" in our context. So there's like a very clear sort of network of ideas that emerges for me in this process. Obviously, it began with a very, very quick declaration of the pandemic as a war on invisible enemy, which is one of the kind of many subterfuge devices that kind of clouded our understanding of what was really happening. So anyway, there's, for example, this total authority poster, which responds to a particular phrasing from the leadership at that moment. That is sort of an interesting amalgamation of a lot of references. I was thinking about this classic Hitler election poster, and you can see kind of general dynamic of the composition. But specifically, for example, if you look at the R, it's drawn to kind of establish a very direct formal connection to the black background, the head floating in the middle. Of course, the head is, for me anyway, connected to this warning plaques that I grew up with in Poland. The overall composition and the crown over the head is a quick reference to this classic British poster. And then the crown in my drawing is, of course, replaced by the Corona beer crown with an extra $sign on top. So it's a kind of a combination of a number of references, but in some ways it is sort of emblematic of the larger idea for the whole series that became this layered network of many references that are happening, not just to current events, but to these historical artifacts. This obviously a kind of a classic propaganda design and device that we've seen in many cultures. Here's a Soviet version of it. Same with the loose lips sink ships idea that exists across the cultures, referenced in this particular new moment, acknowledging the things that we didn't like or didn't hear discussed in relation to pandemic. Like I mentioned earlier, fist smashing things, shoes stomping on things, the victory, a kind of omnipresent visual language that you could see across multiple cultures and different conflicts. Or maybe a slightly broader set of references. On the right, you can see a leaflet that utilized this sort of laughing, dancing skeleton. But I was also thinking about the medieval dance of death ideas and somehow combining it with this rodeo imagery in our country that kind of perverted all of those ideas into this strange welcome poster. And then there are obviously some of the references that were responding to current visual cultural artifacts like this now infamous photograph. So once again, the whole series obviously offers like many layers of ideas and information. I just highlighted a few very specific connections that bring it to that World War II or history of propaganda or history of poster design context. But again, you can see the entire series on Instagram and a lot of it at the South Shore Arts Gallery. So Mike, I know you also had some images of the exhibition, so this may be a good moment to share those with the...
Yeah, so I'll share my screen. I just want to remind people that it's okay to, I monitor the Q&A as well as the chat. Unfortunately, because I'm one person and there's two platforms, the people who are watching on YouTube, and I do see that there are people over here, because I keep that to make sure the feed's up. I don't monitor that feed. So if you do want to ask a question, why don't you just hop on over to the Zoom platform, and you can go ahead and type it into either of those screens. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to bring, well, where'd that go? course, just hang with me. I probably closed it after I shared it with Peter. So let me just create that real quick.
Speaking of questions, while you're doing this, I will say that whether we get to all the questions today or not, or if you are thinking about some other questions you would like to ask me, you can always ask me questions via Instagram. I respond to all the direct messages and all the comments. So there's always an opportunity to continue a conversation by other means.
Thanks for stalling there for me, Peter. That was perfect timing. Now I can go ahead and share the screen. And there it is. So, of course, I can't see everything because of the docking bar. Here we go. So this is the edifice, the object that we built in the middle of the gallery at South Shore Arts in Munster, Indiana, to accommodate Peter's posters and his very specific wishes, which are well worn, are not without merit. I think it was great that Peter had such a vision for the way that these posters need to be installed, and I'm glad that we were able to find a way to make it happen. So what you see here is a number of moving walls that have been placed in the middle of the gallery and then faced with plywood, so that we could wheat paste 120 of the posters from Peter's series in the middle of this gallery. And what you see around you, this are two separate exhibitions or two separate collections of World War II posters that are all around the gallery on the moving walls. And then there are also some objects as well that aren't posters but are related to the war effort and unifying the American people to stand behind the war effort. So I'm just going to click through a couple of these so people get a sense of how these two exhibitions play off of one another, and just sort of what they look like in this space. And here's another view from it. And then the exhibition is Work, Fight, Give. And of course, that language, that phrasing of work, fight, give is not just sort of emblematic of the time and the language on the posters, but also the posters that Peter himself is making.
Yeah, fighting from home front. I love that phrase, and it is kind of amazing that sort of imaginary war scenario that we were engaged in, war on the invisible enemy. So much of it technically was playing out directly either within our homes or out of our homes. There is a kind of a new take on the idea of home front. I feel that was very present in this. That still is actually in our handling or mishandling of the pandemic.
Peter, as I sort of flip through these, do you want to talk about, you have a very specific vision in your mind for the way that these are, the modes of production, dissemination, installation?
I mean, so there is something kind of fascinating to me about the way that the drawings became the posters, because the original, the first drawing in the beginning of the whole series simply started with me here in the basement of my home, just making drawings with ink and simply photographing them. My daughter would hold them on the porch and would photograph them, post them on Instagram and Facebook. And very quickly, the conversations around the series were acknowledging these drawings as posters. And what I mean is that people kept asking me, how can they obtain prints of these images of the series, and referring to them as posters? And I insisted and talked to everybody about these as drawings, because there was an aspect of this of that relationship to just the act of me responding in this kind of journalistic way to the events of the day, that I felt belonged more in a kind of artistic practice that didn't necessarily pursue actively the public space in a traditional sense of the posters, right? But the questions about the prints did make me ultimately think that I really should print those and make these objects that fully articulate that idea. What is interesting to me is that the reason why folks thought that these were prints is because of the way they looked, the relationship between words and images, and kind of compositional handling, the fact that they were indeed inspired by so much of poster language, despite of the mode of production of just hand drawing these things, made them appear as though they were printed matter. And ultimately they did. And because of that, we were able to install these exhibitions in various locations.
And because I follow you on social media, and I have friends in some of the cities where some of your work has shown up, I know that you work with galleries like ours and other sort of institutions, but then I know that there are some instances where these, and we haven't actually talked about this, I forgot to ask you, but there are some instances where these posters show up in smaller quantities in cities on the street.
Yeah.
And can you talk about like that relationship, how that happened with various cities?
Absolutely. I mean, that was very much a product of those sort of initial conversations, acknowledging the kind of printed language of print that I was speaking. Nevertheless, regardless of whether they were drawings or prints, and as so much of this project, really, the appearance of the poster prints on the street in public spaces was very much a result of kind of folks reaching out to me and sort of volunteering this this distribution strategy. And so, the posters showed up in a number of cities, initially in Baltimore with the first 80 posters from the series displayed there. And then subsequently in Portland, in Philadelphia, in New York, in Los Angeles, and Rochester, and Minneapolis also. So a number of cities ended up kind of experiencing these drawings in a physical realm. And it was interesting to see that unfolding as a kind of a new dimension to the project. Even while I was still generating new images daily and posting them within this sort of digital public space, there were already prints making their way into the physical realm in the number of cities.
So one of I have a few things I wanted to get through, but I also like getting questions in the moment. So Lou asked about, I'll just read it. I think you've answered some of it, but I think some of it you haven't. So I'll just read the whole question. You said that Instagram is the home of the project. Can you talk about the other ways people can see the work in a grid, in a gallery, in work you can purchase online and have in your house, or we paste it up? Yeah. So you answered some of that, but then how all that works together, especially thinking about the work as propaganda.
Yeah, so the project continues to sort of manifest itself in new ways. The prints are making their way into a number of the gallery spaces now. There's a book of the entire series that is coming out in April. Postcards were printed somewhere midstream last year of several of the months of the project. And now we are also able to distribute the individual prints to folks who are interested in obtaining their own copies. So there's a selection of these prints that we made available also via Instagram and social media. How does this relate to the propaganda? Well, it's a big subject. It's a complicated and I'd say a rich question. One of the ways that I already highlighted was just the fact that the war was declared, and my sort of immediate reaction to that declaration, to that situation, was that in order to address this specific kind of social, cultural moment, I wanted to use a language that felt appropriate to that subject matter. This is something that is often part of my practice and consideration, is trying to understand the relationship between what is being said and how it's being said. And so the idea of reaching for the concepts of propaganda and maybe recontextualizing them, repositioning some of these ideas, redirecting the otherwise very crude and kind of manipulative language of propaganda to kind of fold its energy against itself, was part of my visual and kind of conceptual strategy for the project. So that sort of intentional hijacking of the crude language of propaganda to other purposes was very much, I would say, I mean, it's definitely a significant part of what the series consists of in the end. Of course, there's lots of other modes of expression or communication that are happening within the series. A lot of it is much quieter, a more intimate kind of communication. But because the series operates now as a singular work, I always thought of it as a single project. That kind of ebb and flow of relationship or proximity to very directly political language is something that I was able to explore throughout the series. I don't think of it as a propaganda. I think at best of the project as a work about propaganda, or a work that utilizes some of the propaganda strategies or techniques, but to different towards different means.
So I'll let Lou sit on that for a moment and see if he has more questions as we move through. But I also want to make sure that sometimes people just have comments, and Miriam said that it's not really a question, but she just wanted to thank you because it was so comforting to see hypocrisy and fear of the moment acknowledged from day to day. Some of the starkest or most grim drawings had the paradoxical effect of making her feel sad, or excuse me, more human and less helpless and afraid. Even if the truth is sad, it felt better to see it in black and white.
Thank you. Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing this. I have to say that it's really being able to connect with folks, and it still is strange to me that so much of the project really actually relied on the social media as a context, because it's obviously a very problematic environment in its own right, but it did facilitate so much of that direct human connection in the time where we were all, I think, craving not just being with other human beings, but a kind of alternative or it's just a different way of processing reality, different from the kind of barrage of the let's just say misinformation, right? Using the most kind of benign euphemism here.
I'm going to flip through a couple images that are just right from our gallery, and I sort of took pictures of the back, or this back wall, because I felt like, and this is just sort of to help maybe get people thinking a little bit about questions, but I felt like some of the formal qualities of these posters really kind of connected with posters that Peter made as part of the series, whether it be compositionally or line quality at different points.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to kind of flip through them so people can get a feel of the exhibition as well. And keep in mind, Peter never got to see these posters, as he's never gotten to see most of the posters that projects. How do I want to say that differently? These posters have been installed all over the country, and he hasn't seen them.
Not yet, but very close. There's an exhibition that's opening in Minneapolis just next week, on the 18th of March. It'll be the first time I'll actually see the prints, the work as a whole in that form. So
that's the second venue where the whole project has been displayed, right? There was one in Bellevue, Washington, right next to Seattle, I think.
True.
Yeah. So then what's also happening in this space, and this was part of my early conversation with, or at one point part of the conversation with Peter, so he knew how we were going to sort of exhibit his work in the space it was going to be in, and sort of the reasons why, is that we also partnered with Indiana University Northwest and used some of their traveling display units as part of their Arts in Action Community Lab. And this is the book nook, as they call it, but the traveling bookcase, which is programmed with some material that came with the other sort of posters on the periphery, but because Peter was involved, I made sure that, and because I'm thinking of posters sort of like the role they fill, not just as sort of like objects to put on a wall and look at and talk about formally, but they serve another purpose, and that is to unify people, to move people, to protest against things. It's a proxy for voice, right? So I wanted to make sure that we had resources that were available that talked about posters as objects, as design objects, and as acts of protest for both adult readers as well as younger readers, as you can see on the pictures on the left. And then I also had some content in there that doesn't flatten out the narrative of World War II as being just an American good versus access evil, right? so that we had some things at home that were a little bit, that weren't so noble in their own right. And part of that was the mass incarceration of Japanese American citizens. So we have some content on this bookshelf that addresses that also rather. And then I pulled, Peter probably already did this part a little bit better, but I pulled out a few images to sort of transition into, if we hadn't already hit on it, the conversation about propaganda and the role it plays in his work, and maybe the formation of like his, not just his aesthetic sensibility, because he grew up in communist Poland, but also sort of like the way that that posters and leaflets are used to communicate messages that may or may not be true, right? So Peter's taught classes on propaganda. That through my conversations with him, I learned was, those resources that he used and gathered over the years teaching that course are the resources he drew upon to work on the series in large part. So I didn't know if you wanted to talk any more about that, or if people wanted to chime in and ask more questions.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very curious relationship, propaganda. Just when I moved to US in 1990, it was sort of a cusp of actual change in Poland. Supposedly the first democratic elections took place in that year, just before I left. But there is a kind of automatic association of Eastern Bloc in general as the world that is just sort of completely saturated with propaganda. And of course it is, but so is our culture. It's just that perhaps we don't call it a propaganda. We've invented a lot of euphemisms for it. I love perception management, for example. There is a drawing in the series. I should have put that in a presentation that specifically calls this out. And I think it's called. Let me see if I can actually figure this out. I think it's called. No, I don't remember the actual text, but the notion that propaganda is. Oh, here I found it. Yeah, it is called perception management. It's this drawing that you can kind of see the visual echo of the tornado ripping through a village and the cornucopia, and yet another funnel that just sort of pours the content in somebody's head. We don't do propaganda here. We do perception management. I'm fascinated by this concept, and when I came to US, I was asked a lot of questions because I became the kind of immediate de facto authority on everything propaganda. Not so obviously, but I did do. I considered doing some research and thinking about ways in which that language or that concept could become useful to art students. And so I did teach a number of courses on propaganda called Politprop at MCAT many years ago. And the objective for the class was to kind of understand not just the kind of mechanics of the propaganda as a visual language or media language, but to also be aware of it and understand the principles of propaganda functioning in our society as well, in our culture. And I always felt that there's this kind of strange cultural jujitsu dynamic that we were engaging with, the idea of like using the energy of the manipulative language and kind of folding it or turning it against itself. And I absolutely drew on some of that research when working on this project. It's not something I do all the time, and it is fascinating to me that this piece, the report series, maybe with its scale, the fact that it had that amazing duration of working in a very focused way on this one work for 8 months, is something that I haven't really done ever before, not on that scale anyway. It took this particular form because that was the right language for the moment. At least that's what I felt at the time. Other work that I've done, maybe dealing with sort of similar concepts in a way took very different forms. And I know that Micah is going to show you some images of another project that I did some years ago called Theater of Operation, which was a kind of a response to the Second World War, not World War, the Second War in Iraq. So it was called the Theater of Operation, the Sonic Reenactment of Iraqi Freedom Operation. That was the full title of the project. And it took a totally different form, even though in some ways, what was happening that was very similar to the COVID Report project is that I was, as an artist, responding to current, unfolding, large historical phenomena. I use the term extreme historical phenomena in reference to a number of these kind of epic scale events that tend to resonate throughout time, throughout history, and continue to have impact on us over time, because it has been an interest of mine over decades. And so the COVID Report project was really no different in that sense. I understood that we were in the midst of definitely extreme historical phenomena. Just the sheer scale, the just enormous grief and damage that we were witnessing on a daily basis alone sort of qualify it as that extreme historical phenomenon, but also the fact that the entire world is experiencing it one way or the other. That was something really quite unusual and powerful for me to acknowledge as an artist, and at the same time acknowledge the need for some form of processing of that reality. And so I definitely look at the project as a record of those events, but it is also a process of witnessing. It's a process of trying to understand what's happening, and to accomplish all of these things while engaging with folks through this work, through the social media platforms. And that shared experience translated into a shared conversation and dialogue. I can't tell you how many conversations I carried with and continue to carry with folks online that are still related to this project, even though the series ostensibly ended on November 3rd.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the direct, I guess I don't want to like overstate it, but the beneficiary of that sort of platform and those kinds of conversations, because you're here, partnering with us on this. But I've also just had the pleasure of, on several occasions now, getting to talk with you for an extended period of time, right, face like this. And I knew, at a certain point when I reached out to you that this project doesn't define you, right? Like this isn't all that you've done, and you've done a number of other things. But it was during one of our last conversation when you started talking about the relationship to this work, between this work and Theater of Operations. Mm-hmm. And I started to see in these posters, like some of those themes kind of coming to the fore. So this idea of the fog of now, like how do you live through a thing and see it for what it is, mm-hmm, when there's so much information coming at you and it's being manipulated before it gets to you. And then also sort of the sense of like, what is time during one of these extreme historical phenomena, as you call them, and so the edge of time. And
at the edge of time is also a drawing that, for me, directly acknowledges September 11th. There are a couple of drawings in the series that make that reference. There's one that was done on September 11th that speaks to that particular phenomenon or the event. But this was definitely the impetus for this drawing really came from these hard, breaking images of folks escaping the burning towers by simply jumping out of the window. And I have been feeling, we all have been feeling at that point, this just surreal sort of situation where a kind of a no escape scenario was presenting itself, and and the very real sense of being at the edge of something, too immense to really wrap around with words. And so this is where the visual language kind of steps in for me anyway, and is able to sometimes articulate some of the ideas that otherwise would be just too difficult to speak to with words, or to convey the kind of I don't know, vulnerability that comes with this with those experiences.
You used the term already tonight, the to bear witness, right?
Right.
You feel like an obligation, and I think that you take that your commitment to that, to forcing yourself to face this imagery, is a thing that I can't really relate to, because it's not a thing that I feel as if like I have as an individual. I can't look at that type of imagery, and that's the segue into this other body of work that we've already referenced a couple of times, but theater of operations. And so this work has been shown at least twice. Is it only twice?
Yes, it was, and that too was sort of amazing that it got to be shown in other spaces. The project was really originally conceived for this location. It's a historic Allen Theater in Cleveland, and the work was essentially developed for that entire space. The rotunda that you see on the right and the actual theater space. It was a predominantly sound installation. There were 36 separate but coordinated sound streams in that space that were playing various content, but most of it were these sort of compositions that musical compositions that were based on that involved these kind of vocal choral readings of texts and dialogues that I have transcribed from helmet cam videos that the soldiers in Iraq would film and then post on YouTube or other social media platforms. So I transcribed these texts, and then we've reenacted those conversations, those dialogues with my family, with friends, colleagues, students, kind of processing that reality of that moment in time in this very specific project, through the specific methodology that really allowed us to kind of crack open the official narrative of that conflict and our participation, our complicity in it, and just bear witness to it in a very, very intimate way. There was also printed matter involved, that the leaflets that you see in this space that were very slowly dropped by these small devices that I built to distribute the leaflets into the space. Part of it was that these leaflets were designed or based, responding to the designs of leaflets that we were actually actively using in Afghanistan and Iraq. We use leaflets as a kind of a weapon constantly. I mean, it's sort of a fascinating format to me, not unlike poster, and acknowledging its kind of weapon-like property, right? I design a lot of leaflets too. It's my other favorite printed matter format.
I'm going to let people see the next image, and then I'm going to read. We had another. Oh, I have to click on it. We had another question comment. So it's interesting to think about the COVID report with the World War II posters. It was obviously a hard time, but there was a clear there's a clear nostalgia for the time and the pleasant feeling of winning, I guess, from the vantage we stand now. And then he's curious to see how maybe his reaction to the work would change, I guess your work in this case, I guess over time. He saw them for the first time wheat pasted up around Baltimore, then found the project on Instagram and followed it daily as part of his processing of 2020, and recently received a couple of posters, and he's also ordered the book.
Awesome.
But it seems too soon to put the poster in his home, he says, and even seeing the images during the talk is a little overwhelming now.
Yeah, I agree. It's even my own relationship with these images is sort of strange these days. I realized that there was something about the pace of the project, the fact that every day, I would spend up to 8-9 hours of the day just generating that image of that for that day. And then the second I would post it, I would already start thinking about the next cycle that I was about to enter, right? As I was discussing the current days of current events with folks online, I was already thinking about what the next day might bring. And even though I would read some stuff in the morning, that process began literally the second the image was posted. And so what that means is that I myself didn't really have much of a time to develop a much of a deeper relationship with these images, because the next one superseded the previous in a very, very steady march through the days. In a weird way, it also reflected what was happening to all of us with the crazy loss of awareness of time or kind of bearings on time. For me, that process, while offered a kind of a steady beat of events and a kind of a rhythm to that sort of delineated time for work and time for communications and sleep, which that basically is the entire cycle. It also just blurred completely a sense of days or weeks or months. Looking back, I really am kind of not just puzzled that the work ended up taking the scope that it did, but looking at some of these images, I very distinctly feel like I didn't really make those images. There is a sense of experiencing something that feels entirely outside of my my direct experience. It's a strange situation, but a lot of these images might have been a kind of I don't know, dramatic experience and processing of the moment, and maybe because of that, I also just pushed them aside and decided that it was not something that I was going to stay with for a very long time. So I can totally connect and understand and empathize with this idea of needing some time, some perspective to re-engage with the work. And it does have something to do with the idea of processing history as it happens versus processing history that has happened, and having the kind of, let's say, luxury, I don't know if it's luxury, but having the benefit of time, layers, distance and time to be able to say, all right, I see what happened back then. Often it's very difficult to say what is happening right now. And part of me feels that because I've actually been paying attention to that strange relationship in the past, whether it's the theater of operation or other projects that I've done that were acknowledging these extreme historical phenomena from the past, gave me a kind of a stronger footing in tackling this situation as it was happening. I mean, I have had that experience with the theater of operation, and I've accumulated all kinds of experience speaking the language of poster design, having just enough kind of formal grounding to be able to step in and process, think through what was happening, not just in my own head, but actually through images, through words, with some kind of methodology that kind of evolved as the project grew.
So I mean, this isn't your first project. This isn't
Not my first rodeo, no.
Well, I'm going to use that phrase. I was very, very intentional. I don't want to end up on a montage somewhere.
Yeah, right.
But you stuck with this for 8 months, and you knew at any point you could have stopped. And it seems like this isn't unique to this project for you, and transcribing dialogue from helmet cam footage, all these sort of labor intensive, but not just labor, but sort of the close read of the situation, or to spend more time with whatever it is you're thinking through. Why is that? I mean, I think I know it's important, but what's there? What about it that this is the solution to this particular problem? to
I don't
spend
know.
9 hours
I
a
don't
day
know if
drawing.
it's solution, but it really just has to do with paying attention and being present in the moment, and not just kind of allowing things to happen. I think that, unfortunately, uh, large parts of this disaster could have been avoided, and could have been avoided if we all critically uh, engaged with the political landscape that we've all kind of lived through in the last 4 years and further back. It's I mean, the last 4 years were a catastrophe, really, and then last year especially, where the layers of the political and social just damage were compounded by the actual health crisis, the pandemic, and layers of greed and complete disregard for human life, rampant racism, systemic racism. All these things were sort of intersected in this kind of a tragic moment. And I do like to think that much of it could have been avoided if we all understood the need for critical presence in our democracy. And I do think that artists do carry a kind of responsibility to, at the very least, model that kind of critical presence, and offer ways of I don't know, a voicing, a record, a reflection, a model, some form of processing that of this really intensely political landscape, but not by means of political language, not by means of propaganda and manipulation that we see coming from the sort of political class, but rather. And call me idealist, but I really do believe that art is a language that is uniquely suited to unpack those complexities with nuance, with detail, in acknowledging that there is more than just this highly polarized, crude, black and white world of propaganda and the political discourse surrounding it. Democracy does require a dialogue, a very sincere, honest, direct dialogue that acknowledges all these complexities and not flattens it out and spits out sort of slick slogans that end up meaning nothing except to appease us in this context.
That's I realized that I also had this image up here that's sort of like
It's a telling image.
very disruptive.
It's a curtain that obscures basically the actual footage from the Iraq. In the actual theater, the curtain was drawn almost all the way to the floor, and you had to go all the way there and just stick your head enough to see what was happening on the other side of that curtain. The theater of operation being the kind of it's a military term, but it's also a kind of a metaphorical device for this particular project.
And I don't have many more slides, but then this particular project was also exhibited again in a much different venue.
Right.
And we don't have to talk about it more if you don't want, but I do want to go through it to make sure
But this was like these objects that were built with the TV sets facing straight down was sort of like reimagining of that idea that was present in a theater, where the video, the content, the reality of the war was present in the space, but it was also intentionally obstructed, right, with the curtain almost completely drawn. So this was, to me, a similar situation where you see these forms in the gallery space, and the content is there, but it requires a very unusual way of interacting. There was just enough space for you to kind of see the underneath of that. Not to mention that I also made these things look like the coffins that were coming back from from Iraq at that time.
This isn't distant. Like this is connected to your last response, and I have it in mind with this piece, but it's during our conversations you talked about, and you've already touched on it a little bit, but like, you're very committed to this idea of bearing witness, as I use the term,
Sure.
or you use the term, but you also use the, and I tried to write it down. My German's not so good anymore.
Oh,
You use a very
Zeitzeuge.
particular term. What was that?
Zeitzeuge, which is a German term for time witness. Yeah, we don't really have a word in English that kind of strikes exactly that that tone, but I've been thinking about that term a lot in relation to the COVID's report project, but in some work from the past as well. The idea um, of of being present in that moment in time, witnessing.
So, and you invite others obviously to witness, and to have to really make an effort. I think that's probably part of it, right? To contort yourself in such a way, maybe is that to bring you into a more present moment, that you are making an effort, you are doing something so that you are aware that you're doing it, versus just being able to walk by it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was a bit of a contract. You had to commit to something, make that and articulate that commitment with your body, and that's a lot to ask for sometimes. And the whole idea of the theater of operation project was to embody that that reality one way or the other. The whole notion of just voicing those dialogues, and sometimes very difficult language that was part of that reality, stuff that you would not necessarily hear from the perception managers on news channels.
Peter, I want to encourage people, if there's any last second questions. We're just about at time, and I want to, you've been so generous throughout this process with your time and sharing your work with us at South Shore Arts. So I want to honor my promise to you to keep us at an hour, but I also want to make sure, as people have an opportunity to think of one or two more last questions, I wanted to show a couple things. If you don't know, some people on the chat tonight already have their posters and have their books, but I wanted to show a couple things that Peter has out there, that if you wanted to have a poster or read more about the project or his work in general, this you can access, I think, through both social media accounts. The link to the form is very long. So.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to access this is just on my Instagram. There's a link in my bio to this order form where you can, if you're interested in some of the prints, there are 12 designs that we ended up printing some extra copies of that we made available to folks.
And then this is the book that's being published by Frank. It's just Frank, correct?
Yeah.
And it's frankfrank.org. It's down there in the corner. A couple other publications on this website as well, but here's the book that's coming in April. I have ordered my copy. And then this is a book that I didn't know about until I was looking some other stuff about you that just came out in relationship to a show that's coming up.
Correct. Yeah, that's this covers basically, I'd say, about 30 years of my work, and it's a book that will accompany an exhibition at the Weizmann Art Museum in Minneapolis in 2022.
2022, and then the posters are up.
Well, the exhibition was supposed to happen in June of last year, but we had some bump in the road, let's just say.
And then so there are, we're in the Midwest. It's not that far of a drive to Minneapolis. The poster project is going up this month, but it'll be up through, I think, would you say August or something?
Yes, the COVID report project is coming up in Minneapolis Art Institute on March 18th. The exhibition opens, and I am told that the show will be up for 6 months, maybe longer. So it's going to be a nice long run, and the museum is open to the public now. I'm super excited to see the show for the first time myself.
Well, Peter, we're right at 8:01. You've been generous, as I've said repeatedly. I have a couple last things I just need to say about our programs. That we're back next week with Ryan Bennett, who's our ceramicist and one of our instructors, to talk a little bit about his practice. And then for anybody who thought this was so good, they want to make sure other people see it, we archive all of this and put it on YouTube channel by 10 o'clock the following week, Monday morning the following week. So next Monday, this will be up on the YouTube channel or right afterwards. It depends on if anything, if there were any problems and we have to fix them, then it's not up right away, but we'll fix them by Monday. That goes for you too, Peter, if you need any of the files. I mean, people don't need to hear me tell you this, but I'll make sure you get them if it's important to you.
Very good. Thank you.
And I just want to thank you and thank everybody who tuned in tonight.
Yeah, thank you all. And thanks again, Micah, for having me and for making the show happen. It was super cool.
You're welcome. Well, I'm going to close out this meeting. I'm going to say goodnight to Peter and let him get some rest because I know he's been teaching today. And
that's true. All right. It's good to see you. Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.